Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1. We're up to chapter 225. So, frankly, I was a little thrown by the shift here. Let me explain why. I mean the shift in Ayin Beis. I'm not talking any... the shift, because he was talking about getting to the deeper level of Meichus Tima, of Chachmas Tima, the super, right? So we spoke that in the previous chapter 223, he spoke about Kabbalah Seil, learning with Mesidav and Nesina what he said is Kashrus, Das, Hanelam in the Avira, the space that's above the membrane of the superconscious, and Tshuva, Chezer. So we've been learning about that. But as you recall, and I want to just repeat this whole track of going Mamat Lamayla through Tshuva, through effort like that, is relatively new in Ayin Beis, because until now he's always been speaking about generally how you access the deeper levels, not necessarily through going lower. So it's the general process of accessing deeper dimensions. So clearly to get to the Etzem, because for example, Matan Torah, if you remember the discussion of Ovis and Matan Torah, nowhere did he say that Matan Torah came after Yetzias Mitzrayim. If he had said that, yes, so Yetzias Mitzrayim is what brought it. He spoke like this: Ovis brought the world to Kel Shaddai, to the Sheresh HaNivraim, and Matan Torah is the Er Chadash. So the process till now, if you really study it, everything was a so-called orderly progression. First you start with Er HaGvul, you get to Er HaBli Gvul, Er Chadash, Yichud Abba Ve'olam Elan. There was no discussion of the tshuva element of, what we usually talk about, the transformation of the darkness element. Am I correct? I mean, I don't recall on all the pages. I mean, again, I'm not talking about maybe the end of a Maimer, a piece here, a piece there, but it was definitely not discussed at length. As a matter of fact, it was almost boiled. I think I may have mentioned it. They usually, Chassidus, some way you start talking about Yisrael Eir Min HaCheshach, and he didn't talk about Eir HaCheshach. He talked about in Eir, does Eir reach the Gvul level of course, the Bli Gvul level of course, all the levels. Now, once he went into the issue of Kabbalah and Keteiros, especially the higher level of Keteiros of Yom Kippur, that's when he went to Tzikik Data, the Bas Melech that goes into a darker place, then Yom Kippur Tshuva, and now Makiv Aver Chezer and so on. All to get to the higher dimension of Chachmas Tima. So, fine, no problem. I mean, the Rebbe Rashab is entitled, it's his hemshech to introduce now that concept. But now he goes even further. In the last chapter, 224, now even more. This is all based on the Biyur Azeir. He's adding that how do you get the Kisur Levusha? Talking about Chachma. Is Malemes L'Keser. So he gave the explanation that Chachma conceals Tainug. What does it mean it conceals? The whole thing with Levush. It's not like a garment. It's just Tainug manifesting in a container. So it manifests in a form of Hela Ma'atzmi. That was what he said. But the example he gave, which is from the Biyur Azeir, which means from the Tzemach Tzedek all the way from the Alter Rebbe, is Eve Sheichre Musar. That you see, the dugma he gives for it is a dugma which is not the usual dugma. You think, okay, give me a dugma of how you reach the superconscious through Kabbalah Seil. Fine. He uses that you see the deepest love in the exact opposite. So as opposed to Gvura Shebechesed that he said, for example, Gvura as a channeler, then Gvura is just a garment. It's a way of channeling Chesed to a child or to a student that cannot receive it all. That's what he said. Helen B'Shvil Agili. But when it's Sheikhrei Musar, when the father rebukes the child, the son, and in that rebuke is really a revelation of deeper Ava, because why would he care? Like he said, Ma'ich Basle. Why would he care? So now he's saying this is the example. You want to reach the deeper level of Chachmas Tima, it comes through the opposite. Why is it? To me, it's a little throwing us because we're talking about Chachmas Tima. Chachmas Tima is not a negative. Chachmas Tima is super consciousness. You're learning Torah, let's say, you're learning with your mind is conscious wisdom. Super conscious wisdom was what's behind it. Since when the super conscious associated with negative, with rebuke or with negative, but he clearly says it. And again, it's not the Rebbe Shab, it's based on the whole Biyur Azeir and explaining the whole thing of Kiyasi Sapela. I'm only mentioning it because it's very boiled that he's going into that. And not only that, now the next chapter. Remember, this is, as I said, the Lashon of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is the Lashon of the Maimer from Tavkuf Samach Ches, is I underlined it here, so you can't see it, but it's a few lines where he speaks about Evei Shechri Musar. And now, chapter 225, the Rebbe Rashab takes it even further. V'adugma mezeh is going to say that now it's Golus. In other words, it's not just sufficing with that mashal. He's actually explaining, which adds a very interesting dimension. That super conscious, because of its fundamental concealment, has a connection to our states of concealment. Because usually you would say Hela Ma'atzmi is a Maila, not a Chsaron. Suddenly now he's bringing it into the world when we experience distance. We should really know it's really closeness. So it's an interesting, that's usually you talk about Golos or Hela Ma'atzmi. Sheikh Musa, you talk about lower than Giluyim, not higher than Giluyim. It's like we spoke about Ribu had Simtsumim. So much Simtsum, so you only see the negative. Even though within it is the positive. But clearly he's connecting Hela Ma'atzmi of Chochmas Tima to our lowest states of displacement, as he's going to talk about now. So if it's Adugma Mezeh, the Adugma of what? The Dugma of this that we just said. That the Primi Sa'ava, Atzmis, is revealed in the opposite, Yuvim B'inyan HaGolus. It's an example we'll understand in the Inyan of Golus. Adugma Mezeh. So is that a mashal? Adugma Mezeh. Or is it a mashal 4 or is it a mashal 2? Adugma Mezeh Yuvim B'inyan HaGolus.
Example for this.
Yeah, an example for this we'll understand in the Inyan of Golus. B'ribei halam is stated in Beis, in its in abundant concealments and coverings, increasing in abundant, intense concealments and coverings. Shezel mishum da ben yakal yafrai, ba'avig de'el v'atshuma b'yeser. The Golus is because the preciousness of this son called Ephraim, like we said before, the Aved Hashem, in a avig de'el v'atshuma, in a great and intense love, b'yeser, increasingly great and intense love. Or a very intense and great love. How do you touch B'Yesher? B'chinas iskashus atzmis, in a state of core and fundamental connection. Shezein avti eschem, like you said before. Amar Hashem. That's the idea. I love them. So Golus is coming because of the great love. This, of course, is taken from Mamorim Chassidus. Let's see how much he explains it. Uksiv ve'evis Yaakov. No, there's the pasuk Aches of the Yaakov ve'evis Yaakov, and I loved Yaakov. V'yadua shezel b'chinas atzmus ein sof shalman b'chinas teyu v'tikun, and it's known this level ve'evis Yaakov is a level of atzmus that's higher than teyu and tikun, because there Yaakov and Esav shehein sham b'chinas achim. He's maramis. He doesn't say mamish, but the pasuk goes like haloi ach Esav the Yaakov. And then it says. He doesn't say it. Oh yeah, right there. Okay. There, Teu and Tikkun, they're like other brothers. Like it says, isn't Esav a brother to Yaakov? Tibis Galos, because when they come out in a revealed state, it's two separate brothers. It's two separate entities. The Gamri. Oh no, my mistake.
Yeah,
I'm reading it wrong.
Okay.
Huh?
It's higher than that.
Yeah. I thought, yeah. High. Okay, so Evis Yaakov means higher than Teyu V'Tikun. Where's Sham b'chinas Achim?
Right before the parentheses.
I know, but when you read in the beginning of the parentheses, how would you type Shehein Sham b'chinas Achim?
In Atzmos.
The Atzmos, they're brothers.
Halei Ach goes on Atzmos.
No, Halei Ech is not.
Yeah, he goes on Atzmos because over there they're equal. Brothers are equal.
Aha. So they're like brothers equal. Because when they come out revealed, Teyu and Tikkun which means Yaakov and Esav, the Gamri. Esav and Yaakov are completely separate from one another, two worlds. So when we say Ach Esav Yaakov, which was the level of Ovas Yaakov, and Ba'atzma said in Sof. That's an atzma sense of that's higher than Teyu and Tikkun. Like it says elsewhere. He continues now after the parentheses, and in this level, he doesn't often do this. In this level, in this atzmas level, that's where he's in this inner And core level, that's where he loves Yaakov. So but I'll tell you why I was confused here. Because if they're equal, why does he love Yaakov?
That's that's exactly the bechira. That's
that even in a level where they are both equal.
He chose Yaakov.
So tell you in Tikkun is two levels.
Not because of a reason. Because
yeah, but he's not talking about bechira now. 1 second. Okay, and Dafka there is Ovis Yaakov. Now he goes back to the Moshe. Because he's talking now the deepest love, that's why he cares, the lichluch. They're being, what do we say? Solid. Before you use the word metunuf. It's not mistanuf, right? It's a little different. Soiled, mistanuf. Lichluch is dirt, there's a word, soiled. Yeah, soiled or besmirched, not besmirched. Dirtied. Lichluch. So that's why it's very much negeya affects him, the lichluch there, lichluch. Shezel mitzad pnimis ahava. So if God was more detached and not so connected, let's talk about the levels of Teyu and Tikkun, let's say, it wouldn't be so negeya to him. In other words, Golus comes because he cares about our problem, to cleanse us. Why? Because the lichluch is very much negay when you're talking atzmis. And that's why we have all the coverings and the concealments. Because why would God have to go through a process of oppressing a situation that is allowing us to be oppressed? It's because negay b'pnimis. So he has to do that. But if it wasn't negay, yeah. So again, this is where I would say this doesn't justify Golus, because the Chassidus says maybe she could have done it differently, but it explains what Golus really is.
No, but it really takes everything that most people are led to believe and turns it over on its head. Most people believe that the higher the levels are, the more detached God is, and here it's saying that the higher the levels are, the more negeya. Yeah.
Look, God sees sinas chinam by Hasheni. He could say, you know what? As long as let them hate each other, and we'll continue on. But no, it's negay ben nefesh that they should be on the highest level, and he tries to warn them and everything. So help nicht. So there's only one choice. You can't let them indulge in their Beis Hamikdash in that type of state. So he destroys it. Not as a punishment, on the contrary, as a ability for them to wake up call. That's the whole point.
But today's modern way of raising children is to allow them to be.
Well, today's another problem. The parent may have also problems. If the parents were God, it wouldn't have That's what I said. If it's a parent that has pure love,
to allow them to be.
Look, the Yisod is like this. When you have tzaddikim, someone asked me, how could you have a Makabel Yisurim Ba'av? God is mamish, you're being oppressed. So one thing you could say, okay, someone else is oppressing you, so God lets it happen. But sometimes you have a situation like health. Well, Yisurim that people have had. The answer is, they know God well. They have established a loving relationship with God. They didn't start with the Yisurim. So when they go into Yisurim, they don't understand it, and for sure they're hurt. But they know for sure that it has to be coming from loving place, because they are absolutely believe that God is kind. And once you believe that, it's not possible that you could be doing something that's just to hurt. So it has to be for benefit.
Well, you said this, a lot of people believe there's this angry grandfather who's always standing.
That's a distorted view of God.
Right.
That's a distorted. But I'm saying, but that's why you have to always go back. If you didn't have a distorted view, you say, imagine that you know that absolutely, look, the Rebbe is a perfect example. If for some reason, coming from the Rebbe was something that Pesechel, Mamish is causing you aggravation. But you know him already, you know him for years, you know that he's not a person that ever aggravates anyone. He has no reason, he has no intention, no interest, doesn't have a mean bone in his body. And mitamo, you see a mean experience coming from that direction. So yeah, you could suddenly say maybe he changed, maybe he has an inside of him, or you could say, I don't get it, but it cannot be. This person is. I'd rather say that I don't get it than to say that he's mean. That's because you're already assured. These are people who had a relationship with the Eibishter. So therefore, if something happens that's negative, they accept it. So it's hard to teach someone who's already, let's say now you meet somebody and says, why am I suffering? If they don't have such a relationship with God, it's very hard to show them, hey, this is really for the good. They have no experience. They'll say, well, that's very nice for someone who's been married to God for all these years. I have not. I just came, this is my first time, why am I, So it's a very important point. Which is why Takit says that God does not punish, that the Yisurim Adavkin is slaps in the face. He'll go after the ones that are closest. Go after, because they're the ones that are kalim, that are able to deal with it. It's a very sensitive matter because I don't want to justify it at all. It's just you have to say that the bottom line is that Yisurim or any type of negative is ultimately a deep expression of love. What's difficult is to talk about this. It's easier to talk when you're not in it, because then you can talk academically. As soon as you're in it, like the story with that Rav, as soon as he, it happened to him, he said, you know that one, right? The story goes, there was this guy who, unfortunately his family was killed, died in an accident, and a ship went down. And no one wanted to tell him, so they chose his Talmud Muvik, to be the one that gives him the news. The guy's not interested in telling him such news, so he's procrastinating and the cup, running around. And then he comes up, look, what could he say to him? He doesn't want to. How do you tell a person, your wife and children perished? His Rav is in the Beis Medrash. He comes in and he asks, I want to ask you a shayla. He opens up a Gemara Barachas, says, Kashem shemavachem ala baracha, kach mavachem ala klola. Just like you bless God for a blessing, you also for a curse. How could you equate the two? Doesn't say bracha klal also? Okay, teva not right. So he said, you're right, you can v'vachem ala bracha, you're right. So his Rav, who's a big Talmud Chacham, started going into the whole explanation. That the Eibishter, everything that comes from him is good. So, just see it. But the Talmud kept insisting, but how could you equate the two? So he goes into that there's Ele Machshavei Sechem, all the slew of explanations that we hear. You hear everything. If you go to tell the story, you can elaborate for a half hour, all the explanations. And the Talmud keeps insisting, what are you talking about? So are you saying to me that when somebody's family dies, for example, they have to bless and celebrate just like when they're dancing at their child's wedding? She said it's difficult, but that's what it says. Kashem. It doesn't make without any qualification. So the Talmud says to the Rav, he says to Rebbe, you could start dancing. They told him what happened. Instead of dancing, he fainted. When he revived, he said, Mitamo, verstehe nicht die ganze Gemara. He suddenly said, I don't understand this whole Gemara. It's an excellent story that captures. It's very good to talk about it until it happens. Because we're human beings. That's why it's Yisurim. It's not called Tainugim. So there's no question, it's a negative. And that's why, if you look at the Sikhs, when I wrote the chapter in Torah Meaningful Life on pain and suffering, it was not an easy chapter to write, because if you're empathetic, you can't just sit down and suddenly philosophize and start waxing eloquent about how the negative is really the positive. It's a very nice thought, but when you're sitting, God forbid, going to a mother who lost a child, or other things like that, you don't exactly go and explain them. So one of the main sikhs I used was Simchas Teira Toshin Lamed Aleph. It was the Kvias was, it was Shabbos, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, so there were two Farbrengens, Shabbos, Bereshis. Second Farbrengen, Lamed Aleph, the night Farbrengen, in other words, before the Shkia. Eli Wiesel was there, and the Rebbe spoke for a good hour and a half about the Holocaust. Unbelievable Farbrengen, that Sikha. And basically, the Rebbe also, a similar thing he wrote to my wife's mother, passed away young. So Sarah Lieberman wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote her a long 3-page letter. So I use those two things. Basically, the point that is there, the Rebbe makes very clear. There's two separate tracks here. One track is that we don't understand. Vayidim Aden, Shteik. God hasn't explained. Why did he say Shteik? Let him tell it. This is the deepest love. I'm giving you the deepest love in the Sari Arugi Malchus. Why? The Malachim, Moshe Rabbeinu came saying, Zu Teira, Zu Schara. So he should have said, Listen, you don't understand me. I have a far deeper, there's a deeper love. Let him give him this whole Perek and Ayin Beis. Why say shtick? And if you don't, kachal machshav, and if you don't quiet, I'll destroy the whole world. Because there's an element that we cannot fathom. Because after all the explanations, God could do anything He wants. You can't figure out another way. It has to be dafka, a painful way. Let's say, you could think Kol Yachle could have figured out another way to do it. Yeah, maybe we couldn't figure out another way, because how do you wake somebody up if they're comfortable? So you have to cause them some anguish. But God could have come up with another way. So there's no real answer. Shtick. And Vayidem, quiet, silence. And the Rebbe speaks at length about that. That you can't. That's when it comes to a thing like that, you have to. Which is the real, basically saying that a brilliant mind cannot speak to a bleeding heart. That's the bottom line. A person's crying, you start telling them, listen, let me explain to you why you're in pain. It's ridiculous to do that. It's actually arrogant and inappropriate. So that's one. Then there's another thing. You want to sit down, discuss it dispassionately. The Inyan, what's happening, not why, but what do we do about it? The Rebbe wrote a letter to a doctor. We don't ask why it happened. We ask what do we do about it. The why is very complicated. The why may be beyond why. God is beyond, who knows? But what we do about it, so then it's not just a random thing goes. Like that's where the Rambam comes in. It's not mikra nikris. You don't say, to say that is achzorius. There's a reason for it. What do you mean not mikra nikris? So the Rambam says, interesting, he says you have to look inside yourself, the whole hilchos tinius. He doesn't say go find somebody else. People always say, oh, the Rambam says, so let's, this thing, Katrina happened, that's why, because they gave her back Gaza. This one had a death because his mother stole money from me. Oh yeah, the Ram doesn't say that. The Ram says you should look at yourself. He doesn't say to look at others. Whereas the point, finger pointing is not the point here. The Rambam says if you witnessed and you went through a difficult thing, there must be some lesson for you. Why would you see it? To not say that, that's even Hilchas Avelis is the same idea. It's an element of tshuva. He says clearly, Yafashbish b'maisov. Why? Because it happened to you. This is a separate track altogether. And here the Rebbe went into the deeper explanation that there's a deeper love, there's deeper Giluyim that Mashiach comes. The Rebbe in his letter, he writes that since I'm a little child, I've been thinking about Mashiach, and then we will know Eit Hashem Ke'anafta Bi, etc. I just want to qualify because sometimes you read this, you come away, oh great, it's a deeper love, right to the guy. Since there's a Pashut. I wanted to qualify that point. So it's really two separate tracks, and they're not a contradiction. Because you still say we could have done it a different way, why not to that extent, like the Rebbe said about the Holocaust in another place. It was the shir. How many Avedas, that type of approach, every time you sin, more, there's a point where mitzvahs accumulate, Avedas get diminished. How much can you keep on punishing them? And then there'll be more Vedas, and then there'll be more punishment. So there's things that are disproportionate, and so on. And one final point I want to say is that, so basically, the silence, however, has a deeper dimension. But just to clarify, it's not it's not a justification for it's an explanation of once it exists. Yeah. But the bottom line is, as I said before, it's based on the premise that that God is loving. And B'meila, now you see, because he's loving and he sees lichloch, he sees the child has fallen or there's something that needs to be cleaned, and he determined the only way to do it is to Alamas Stadium. So that's what it really is about. It's coming an expression of the deeper love. I wanted to add one more point, which I forgot a moment.
I read a story about a chassid that had got typhus in Russia, and he was quarantined in a hospital, and people were dying left and right over there. And he had a friend, another chassid. They used to come outside of the window every day and read to him. Beis, I think what is it? Yeah, every day he read it to him, and he said that's what kept him alive and that's what got him through.
Yeah.
Outside from the window, he couldn't go in because there was quarantine.
The Yudalef talks about this. Yudalef. I wanted to say one more thing. Okay, miss.
I thought it was Asher or something. No?
That was the chassid who was reading the letter.
Yeah.
So Rabbi's grandfather got sick, and the chassid was Asher.
Asher Nikolaever. There's the story with the Rab Zusha and Rabbi Melech. The one where one of them gets into prison. and his brother comes to see him. And he sees him very depressed. So he says, "Why are you depressed? You know that everything's l'teva. We taught about the simcha." So he says, "I'm not depressed because I'm in prison. I'm depressed. I haven't made a bracha for because of the pail, the bathroom." So
they were there together, I think, no?
Oh, he came to visit? I'm not sure. Anyway, so he said to him, the same Eibishter that said, you should make a bracha, said, you shouldn't make a bracha in such a matzav. So it's a mitzvah. Like the Rebbe explains, when Friedrich Rebbe was in prison, they asked him, do you know where you are? So he says, yeah, Mokum, that's part of a mezuzah. Adil shel susim. A stable. So the Rebbe said, Das Gufa, he was mile of the place because he was Megala Halacha in that place. The header becomes a chiyuv. So when Rabbi Zusha heard that, the Chagim dancing. And the whole place started dancing. So the guard came running. Yeah, came running and said, what is the dancing? They said, we don't know. The Jew was dancing. Why is he dancing? We're not really sure, but it's something to do with the pail. So he said, yeah, I'll pull the pail right out. Yeah. You know. Yeah. Okay, this is a more humorous side of it. You know, unfortunately, it's sometimes far more painful than that. But the point is that there is a deeper care. See, there in that story, it's lav dafka, it's a deeper av. It just shows you that when you attitude, even a negative can become a positive, which I'm sure is what he's going to talk about. But okay, that's the nice. Allah is terms in the game. The be'etzem muhusam who are ava atzmis dafka, because in the etzem muhusam, it's ava atzmis dafka, like he said before. So in time the Beis Hamikdash was standing and everything was going well, you could not tell the depth of the love. When do you tell the love? When kila chamosei al eitzim ba'avonim, but he will not touch his people. Which is another way. It doesn't say that here. I'm just saying, that he released his.
Was killed them.
But something was
maybe
remained.
a few thousand that were left alive.
Yeah, but you and I are sitting here.
From those few thousand that were left alive.
Yeah. So he released kila, which means he relieved his anger on the stones and on the wood. It's on the love. Bnei Yisrael lechalisam. So bottom line is the atzmis av is expressed there. Good.
All the tzaddikim of that generation will kill them.
What did I want to add? So all this is like the Pardes writes in Shadhei, Gate 5, Chapter 3, B'Shem HaBohir. Bohir Sefer HaBohir is like in the time of the Zohar, but a similar name, Bohir. Hamayim Horu V'Yoldu Afela. That the water were impregnated, Haru. V'Yoldu Afela, and gave birth to darkness. Must be a posuk, right?
Never heard of it.
Hamayim Haru V'Yoldu Afela. Meira. What does that indicate? Ki ilas v'sibas hagvura she'afeli ha'chesed she'en hamayim. So the mayim gives birth to darkness, because the reason and cause for gvura is darkness. Afela is more than darkness, a very heavy darkness.
Like in Bayim Mitzrayim.
Yeah, that's the chesed she'en hamayim. So hamayim is chesed, gives birth to afela, to the gvura. In other words, the cause of the gvura and this tremendous concealment is the core love. And the power of this concealment is rooted in chachmas tima. So in other words, the lowest concealment is rooted in the highest concealment. Like the Ramaz, that Moshe Zakuto, Kabbalist, writes, it's a pirush on the Zohar from the Arizal, student of the Arizal, in the beginning of Pasha Pinchas. Now this lashon Koich HaHelam is again from the Tzavkuf Samach, from the Tzemach Tzedek. V'yesh leimer. Okay, so let me. I'll rely that he's going to explain it. If not, we'll obviously allow, because here what are we dealing here? We're dealing with that the lowest darkness is coming from the highest darkness. So there's we can say the deeper chachmas tima, the inner dimension. Remember the super conscious. Zo b'chinas kashemen hatev. Remember we learned that was kashemen hatev. There was shemen mischas chedesh was the lower level of Chachmas Tema, Shemen HaTeiv was the higher level, Atik. Shu b'chinas HaTeiv ha'atzmi shelamayla bein harech mekol ha'giluyim. Shemen HaTeiv is the Teiv Atzmi. It's core good that is higher than, and infinitely higher from all revelations. Hu b'chinas stimus be'etzem. This is a state of core concealment. Remember, there's concealment relative to the recipient. There's core concealment. She'ena gam b'chinas makil ha'giluyim. It's not even a state of makil ha'giluyim. You can't say, okay, here's the reservoir or the source, and here's how it's concealed, and now it's revealed. This is beyond revelation. And that's why dafka from there, specifically from there, comes the power to conceal. Shutev be'etzem, because it's fundamentally good. In other words, a good that comes, like he said before, remember, a father who's giving his child the gevura shebechesed, where he's channeling, that type of good, that is not fundamentally concealed. It's just being channeled. It's there, but it's there in a limited way. You can't say that level, in other words, if you only love someone superficially, you cannot give them love through concealment, because your love is only bound by how much you give it to me. Let's take a person that's in business with you. They don't love you. I'm bound to my obligations to you, so I'll give you what I promised I'd give you. If they do something that is fundamentally like a gullus, like a dark, it's not coming from a loving place. They're not capable of doing that. Only someone that loves you so deeply, that the connection is so fundamental, can express it in a helamdika way, because their connection is deeper than what their expression is. So expression ends up being a limited flow. So you say, listen, I'd rather have a limited expression of Tev than have Tev HaHelam coming from the Etzem. Fine, that's what the Jews said to the Mesh, the Eibishter, when he came out of Mitzrayim. They said, the Eibishter said, I have to be Mekayim what I told Avram Avinu. So they said, we're Mavatar on what you told Avram Avinu. Well, God had it his way anyway. So he gave them 210 years because it would come of the Chuz Gadol. Okay. So Dafka from that place, you can conceal in that type of fashion.
Or like all the silver was buried somewhere in the minbar.
Yeah. And what's revealed is something that's completely concealed. Now he continues. Okay, this is all saying what the anatomy of the darkness. The anatomy of the concealment is that's really a fundamental element of love and connection. However, the purpose of pnimiyuse and the inner meaning and the inner significance of this helem, v'hainu etzem uhusehu etzem hatev. What is the etzem uhus? You see darkness, you see concealment, but it's purpose, and it's not just purpose. You could say purpose, but right now it's dark, and its purpose is to bring you to light. No, it's pnimius also is etzem hatev. So how do you get there? How do you get there? So he says, through the work in this state of Helam. This state of Helam. You don't get overwhelmed. And even this state of abundant concealments and coverings, you stand strong in performance of Torah and mitzvahs. And you stand up to every obstacle. That nothing from all the many impediments and blockages in the time of exile will not stop him from exerting in Torah and performing mitzvahs. Okay, so before the befrat. So that's how you start redeeming it, start freeing it. That you see the concealment, you see no gili, and to the naked eye it looks completely negative, but you don't care. You forge ahead. You forge ahead. Befrat, specifically that's in general. Specifically to Aveda in the halamas atzman to transform them to good. What does that mean? That not just that you don't care about what these, you disregard these impediments. You actually mamtik, you sweeten the gvura. This gvura, shua yetzer hara shisapach lalakus. The gvura here is the yetzer hara. You use the yetzer hara itself toward elikus. So this way, the first thing, before the frat, you could say, you know what? I ignore the yetzer hara. I ignore that voice, and I move ahead. He say, no. Not only that, they want you to go back to that voice and come along with us, transform it. Yeah, this is a very important point.
They say, how do you transform the Yetzer Hara?
What does that mean? How does that happen? That the intensity and the power of the animal soul, it gets transformed to holiness. So a few things here, two things. Both in a tshuva that was with far more intensity, because his natural soul, you see, nefesh habamis, nefesh hativis,
interchangeable.
Yeah, sometimes interchangeable. Sometimes it could be b'diuk also a bit, maybe not. Because maybe the nefesh habamis doesn't have tzad, only the nefesh hativis has tzad, but then you transform the animal soul, maybe. Anyway, so that's a tzad benefesh hativis shalei, that he feels what's tzad? Constrained. He feels trapped. He feels constricted. V'hu bo lidei tshuva, and that causes him. Remember we learned before about tzad. Causes him to jump. It causes him to rebel, so to speak, and yell out and to tshuva. Shatzaika b'zei primis atzmos yeser, because the yelling of this comes from the core, inner and a core, an increasingly core place. He says, "Ayin mashiz bar lekaman," and look at what we'll learn later. He's going to talk about this later. V'hein, that's one way. V'hein, and both through that tshuva. V'hein b'chinas teikav ha'ava. So that's tshuva, which is really crying out and saying, "Help, get me out of this place." That's the voice. And hein, in the teikav ha'ava, in the intensity of the love ha'rotzeh and the thirst, of the yearning, the teikav ha'tainug alakus, and the intensity of pleasure and godliness. So that's like a sumaran asay tev, essentially. One says, "Get me out of here," and the other one says, "I love you so much." Think of it like this: you run out of a burning building, so you get me out of here, and then you embrace your family. I love you so much. You appreciate that. The love is so much more intense because it came from this. So it's like two tenuas in this intensity. And this is the transformation, because this is not just that you don't care about the Yetzer Hara's voice. You're actually using the negative toward a positive. So till now you said, okay, you know what? It's very important, because this is a very important point. He's not just talking about, you say, you know what? It's concealed. I don't see godliness. I don't see anything good. I continue and commit. And that ultimately will reveal, he says, no, more than that. That you actually use the pain that you have from not seeing, and you turn that into a very deeper passion.
As a thrust to get into the positive, or that itself becomes the positive?
Both. I think from here it seems like a thrust, because, tzarle, he's tzaika, it comes to tshuva, and I think it's all the above.
Because once you get to the positive, then...
But then what's happened is, not just that in other words, the cheshech, you could say, you know what, I ignore it, and I move on. But no, what happens if you use the cheshech to catapult you, then it becomes transformed. Then it becomes transformed, and then, because why is the second point necessary? Because if you really want to access the ava atzmis, chachmas timah be'etzem, you need the second part. It's not enough just to ignore it. If ignoring it would basically be, I ignore the cheshech, and I continue. But this intensity is what is actually reveals the intense love, because it's brought you intense love. No, it's God's intense love that caused the concealment is revealed when you use the concealment to have intense love in return. That's the point. Yeah.
So, if you continue to forge ahead,
but here he may not be speaking about Nisayan. He may be speaking about Bedurim. I'm not sure, but. Regardless, we'll see. Maybe there the word was, why was speaking about Nisayan there? There he was talking about the 10s and 11, right? Klippus is more. The Birra Klippus is the Nisayan, and I don't remember. I have to look.
Relevant here is when you can forge ahead. You don't look at them. Liminis ve'ikuvim. It's like.
He said the same age is there. Yeah, there's a number of chapters. I'll go back to this one. And this is the idea of libi b'sari, my heart and my flesh, will sing. Shalev b'basar hagashmi, that the physical heart and flesh, they sing. They actually celebrate. Meranen, how would you say meranen more than sing? Jubilate? They jubilate, maybe. Imamish is hapche. So the word is hapche here. Is hapche, transformation. And this is a state where the animal soul has no other good except the good of godliness. And that is where he has core pleasure. Through this is revealed the fundamental concealment from the core of Chachmas Tima. So it's mamish, that's the word. The Chachmas Tima has the power to conceal fundamentally because the love is so deep, so it's higher than Giluyim, and therefore the concealment can be complete when in a state where the child needs that. Where when we ignore that darkness and we don't get flustered by it, and more than that, you allow it to waken up in you of deeper voice and reach through tshuva and through love, you access the love that is hidden in the fundamental concealment. So from both ends, God concealed it completely because it's coming from some atmistic place. And we let the darkness reveal such a concealment. So in other words, only darkness can bring out that type of passion from us, which in turn connects to the Ava Atzmis from Elokus. We should stop here. Because now he's going back to what we learned. So before we stop, let me just say, and that's the Pella that we spoke about. Remember how Chachmas Tima goes up, becomes Aleph, becomes Gili. Okay, we'll talk about that more in the next class. So we stop here. We did the first half of chapter 225, pages 455 and the top of 456.